There you got my story. Just ask a woman. There you got my story. Trouble.
You are listening to Feminist Current. I'm Meagan Murphy.
Just ask a woman. Just ask a woman. Any woman.
Today, pornography is inescapable. It permeates our self-image, our relationships, media, and pop culture. Even academia and feminism, as it has manifested itself within the third wave, seem to have embraced porn culture. A new book edited by Heather Brunskell-Evans explores the various ways pornography has intruded on our bodies and sexualities, whether through cosmetic surgery or sex therapy. Heather is a social theorist, philosopher, and senior research fellow at King's College in London. I spoke with her over the phone about the book, called The Sexualized Body and the Medical Authority of Pornography, and about the way discourse around pornography has changed over the years. Here's that interview. Well, that over-referenced quote from Justice Stewart, I know it when I see it, when asked, what pornography is, actually does make some sense. I mean, for the most part, we really do know what porn is when we see it without needing to reference any detailed point-by-point definition. Definitions are still important, of course, especially when engaging in debates around what's harmful to women and what's not. So, what is porn?
Meagan, I actually have a slight reluctance to answer that question because I get dragged into it so many times. So people ask what's the difference between pornography and erotica, and so on and so forth. And we get bogged down in the definition. I'm not avoiding it, but can I start from another point of view rather than answering it directly?
Of course.
The point of view that I'd like to address it from initially is that we're told what pornography is at the moment. We're told that pornography is about sexual freedom. It's about freedom of speech. It's about being not sexually repressed. And it's something that it's a little bit naughty, but in a sense it's quite harmless and innocuous because it's just representations. It doesn't really matter. We shouldn't get worked up about it. So the reason why I'm saying this is I think that viewpoint about porn has been directed by the pornography industry. And it's very interesting the way that the pornography industry we think of pornography as something that's just to do with ourselves, our individual selves. It's what sexuality is really about. And how could we complain about that? If people want to have sex with each other and they do it on screen, what's the problem with that? So it's very difficult then to come in to define what pornography is in contradistinction to that view that people have, because it's so firmly fixed in people's minds that pornography is just a natural thing. It's just about people having sex with each other, and what's the problem with it? So in the culture, we do know what pornography is when we see it. I think that's a really good way of describing it. It's what gets us sexually excited. It feels like you're doing something naughty and it's a bit rude and that you shouldn't be watching other people having sex with each other. But the idea is that we're just getting a view into what is natural. And that what our culture says that we shouldn't look at what people do in private. So it's taking the lid off that feeling that we're doing something that's transgressive. So answering the question is how other people see pornography, or what's in the culture, the way that the culture normally views pornography, and what an objection to pornography might be. So are you asking what my objection would be, or what a feminist or a way of seeing pornography would be?
I mean, I agree with you. I find those conversations really distracting and frustrating when people are constantly focusing on the definitions and saying, well, what's wrong with this, and pretending that it's just about feminists hating nudity, We're just prudes, we hate sex, we hate women's bodies, we don't want to see women's bodies on film, we don't want to see images depicting any sexuality whatsoever. And that's not the case. So, that's why I ask, what is it that we're talking about when we're talking about pornography? We're clearly not just talking about sex and sexuality and naked bodies, but I think that in our culture, in what Gail Dines has called a porn culture, a lot of people do really have trouble understanding how to differentiate, understanding why they should think critically about porn. Or sex in general, is it that feminists are just being critical of sex, or is it that feminists are being critical of images of sex, or is it, something more than that?
I think that the reason why I have a reluctance to start giving a definition of pornography is because what I would really like to do is launch into pornography as sexual violence towards women. And I know that the minute those words are said, sexual violence towards women, people recoil and they don't associate pornography with sexual violence towards women. And I find that personally very strange, because any very quick viewing of pornography, internet pornography, and what you will see is violence towards women, the degradation of women, the name-calling of women, and so on and so forth. So it astonishes me that people don't see that. And I don't necessarily think that they're pretending that they don't see the violence, because really they enjoy pornography and that they kind of don't want to admit that there's violence there. I think that is part of it. But I think there's something larger going on. There's almost a cultural disavowal that such a thing could be the case, that there is so much violence towards women in pornography, that the violence is so normalized that, most people are watching pornography, most people are being aroused by it. So it's a part of a kind of normal practice for people to use pornography. So there's a real disjunction between the using of pornography, the violence that is there, and that people don't actually see the violence. So, how has this happened? How has this happened in the culture that we don't see what's right before our very eyes, and actually that people are finding it erotic? I think there's a real problem there, and we can analyze this. Why is this the case? Why do people who get very exercised nowadays, because feminism is on the rise again, thankfully, and feminism isn't a dirty word any longer. It used to be not very long ago, actually. So people who are actually declared feminists and who in their ordinary lives will object to the fact that women earn less than men, that there's lots of sexual violence in the real world, as it were, and sexual assault, and get very worked up about this, but won't go the extra step to say that pornography itself depicts violence towards women. So, we can look at it from many different angles. One is that people think of it as being fantasy. And if we start to say that fantasies are wrong, then, the argument would be, well, let's not look at murder in films. Let's police our imaginations. And I think there's this idea which has been fostered by the pornography industry, which is very, very, it's the creator of our imaginations, as it were, but it keeps itself on the sidelines as if it has nothing to do with it. But the idea is, this is just fantasy, this is just, it's not real. So if you're going to get worked up about this, then you're going to get worked up about anything that you might read in a novel or on a film, and really just chill out and be cool about this. And it's difficult not to want to come over, as you said earlier. If you start saying this is real and it has material effects, you come over as not being cool about the imagination, yet wanting to police the imagination. And also, I think, women they want to be with the boys in this. Actually, I was just writing about this today. The kind of feminism we've had for the past 20 years has been pro-pornography. And it's shaped the way that we as women and as feminists, that we should look at pornography, which is to be really cool about it and to think of many of the images it's just ironic. Don't get too serious about this. You're spoiling our fun.
So, in the book, you address the fact that a liberal approach to pornography has really taken over discourse. And I wonder if you can talk about what that means. What's a liberal approach to pornography, and how did that happen? How did this liberal approach take over discourse around porn?
Well, I think there are many different aspects of it. I think that you can never separate out pornography from the cultural and political context in which it's being consumed. So there was a very distinct change in pornography and the analysis of pornography, the feminist analysis of pornography, which was, in the 70s and the 1980s. As you know, sort of second-wave feminists critiqued pornography as an example of capitalism, of an expanding industry, of misogyny, of patriarchy, and so on and so forth. But those terms were very familiar within the culture anyway. So feminist analysis could call upon those ideas which were applied to issues of class and race, issues of hierarchy and power. Now, those discourses themselves started to change in the late 1980s and 1990s. Talking about oppression, class oppression, racial oppression began to change too. And so the change in analysing pornography took place at that time. So we could think of that period of time as kind of neoliberalism. The market became popular. People started to feel a little bit embarrassed to talk about class. People started to aspire to do well for themselves economically, make money, and so on and so forth. I'm being very simplistic here. And so at that particular time then, that was what I'm going to call a kind of neoliberal individualism that took over the culture at large. And it silenced many of the previous analyses and discourses. So within that, the pornography industry is excellent at marketing its wares, just like any other industry is. And what it did was it took feminist discourses and used them for their own advantage. So the backdrop to the 1980s and 1990s, when feminist analysis of pornography started to change, was that pornography was about feminism. It was a woman's right to be not ashamed of her own body. It was a woman's right to enjoy sexuality on the par with men. And by the time we got to the late 20th century, we had feminists arguing the same thing too. And feminism had, it lost its class analysis. It became, if a woman wanted it, if a woman enjoyed it, it became about being an individual. An individual woman, if she wanted something, could call herself a feminist. And so what was once feminism in the 70s and 80s, which was a class affiliation, it was like the group of women which was oppressed, turned into anything that a woman wants makes it feminist. And the pornography industry, of course, sort of breeds on this, encouraged it, facilitated it, and could sit back and let all of this happen. And the best propaganda for the pornography industry is the feminist analyses that came in at that particular moment. So pornography didn't have to continue to defend itself as something which was degrading to women.
Because the liberal feminists did that work for them, which has been really helpful for the porn industry.
Yeah.
Critiques of pornography and the sex trade more broadly, of course, is so often reduced to what liberals and leftists will call a moral panic or a sex panic. What's that rooted in? Where did that idea come from?
That bit of rhetoric has been really persuasive, and it comes precisely from the idea that pornography is allegedly about sexual liberation. What pornography allegedly does is remove us from the religious or patriarchal view which says that sex is bad, that what we should do is only have sex within heterosexual, married, stable relationships. Sexuality should be to do with family values and so on. So pornography then, and the industry, sets itself up against this. It sets itself against that form of morality and says, look, we can be really free now. All of that is just outdated stuff. We don't need that anymore, and we're really cool because what we're going to do is we're going to put two fingers up to that, and we're going to say sex isn't dirty, and we can do it as much as we want when we want, and so on and so forth. So what that rhetoric of a moral panic refers to, it refers to the ways in which those initial discourses of pornography in the 1960s and 70s was that that pornography rejected that outdated moralism. And so what the rhetoric does, it says anybody who wants to make a critique of pornography must be part of that group of religious fundamentalists or sex-negative feminists and so on and so forth, who really don't like the body. So it's referring to the fact that allegedly we don't need that moralism anymore. It belongs to something which is very repressive. And actually what it does is it enables the old patriarchal views of women, you know, that women are divided into whores, and those women who can be used, and those women who, you know, mothers, sisters, daughters, and so on, that men have to respect. You know, so it actually, pornography disguises the fact that it in itself replays those discourses all of the time. The woman is the whore, the woman is the whore, the woman is the whore. So to get back to your initial question, which is what is pornography? My simple answer to that would be pornography is the graphic representation of women as whores. It's difficult for women to hear that, which is why I don't like saying it immediately. I think Andrea Dworkin is absolutely right. It's an unpalatable thought. We don't like to think about that. But that's what pornography does. It says that women are whores. Certain women are whores, and they can be treated in particular kinds of ways. And in fact, to be really cool, you modern women, you get down and dirty with the boys, and you can enjoy being a whore. It doesn't escape the whore. It embeds us in the whore. And there's nothing new about this. It's a very, very old idea. And so from my point of view, if we were actually going to be sexually free and sexually emancipated, we would reject completely the idea that we could ever label a woman as a whore. The men get off scot-free. They induce this. They are there in the pornographic scenarios. But they are not whores. It's only the women who are whores. And it sounds so extreme, but it's the truth that is what pornography depicts. Now, you know, women and men we're all of us not free from the culture. And if what pornography says, there's something exciting, that a woman gets power from being a whore, you know, what we'll do is, because we're social creatures, we're social animals, we will enjoy that form of sexuality too. So I'm not moralizing in a sense at all about it. I don't want to make women feel bad if they find pornography sexually exciting. I don't, in a sense, want to make men feel bad if they find pornography sexually exciting. I think we need to stand back from it and not blame individuals as such, but blame or analyze a culture in which all of us are caught up with it. All of us are caught up with it. And interestingly, medicine is caught up with it too. Mm-hmm. So scientific discourses are caught up with it.
In her chapter, Julia Long discusses trends in women's hair removal in relation to pornography. And I think it's interesting that things like pubic hair removal in particular are so accepted by women today, especially young women today. And also that so many continue to insist that trends of hair removal have nothing to do with porn culture and men's porn consumption. I wonder if you've studied this phenomenon at all. What is that connection? What's the connection between pornography and women's hair removal?
I think pornography gets into almost every aspect of our lives, but it's difficult for people to see that. It's a bit like women say, I don't dress for anyone else, I just dress for myself. When in fact we know that we all dress for what is acceptable within the culture at any one time. So you just look back at photographs from different periods and everybody's dressing the same. Nobody's saying they must dress the same. We just take up what our culture gives to us as normal and acceptable. And so girls are shaving their pubic hair as soon as they get it. They may or may not have seen pornography, but they know that this is what other girls are doing. And people conform to what has become normal. But it's clearly linked with pornography. Then you have to do an analysis of how do things filter down into the culture so much. They just do. That would be for a very long conversation. But there's a kind of loop effect going all the time. We're changed by the culture in ways that don't feel that they're direct. They feel as if they're personal and independent choices that we're making. When you asked me that question, I was reminded that when I had my first baby in hospital, it was a practice in the UK at that time when I had my first baby to shave pubic hair of women in labour for hygienic reasons. And I can remember feeling absolutely humiliated by the lack of pubic hair, because it felt like I had been infantilized by the shaving and I couldn't wait for the hair to grow back again. And I was thinking that how much the culture has changed now, so that actually to be a woman and to feel like a sexual woman, you have to have no pubic hair. I think it's really dangerous, actually. I think it's dangerous because it makes women's genitals and children's genitals identical. And, the growth of pubic hair signifies that you've become an adult, that you're becoming an adult, and in that you are then developing an adult sexuality. I think it's a really serious thing, actually, that what is happening is that, men are being induced to find women's genital area without pubic hair exciting. Pornography makes it exciting, and it'd be very difficult, I imagine, for a man when he sees a little girl just on the beach or whatever, not to see what he sees in pornography. Whereas previously, before this fashion, a man would understand that the little girl was in a phase of her life which was non-sexual, and that the pubic hair signified that the adolescent or the young woman then was coming into that phase of her life. That has just been erased now. And, I think pornography is dangerous for all kinds of reasons. One of them is that it incites, it's continually inciting the idea that for all kinds of reasons, that, women's pubic area now looks like the pubic area of a little girl, particularly since in pornography often, people have labiaplasties and so on to make the labia neat and tidy. But, the kinds of things that are said in pornography, I don't particularly want to repeat them in this interview, around daddies and grown-ups and stepdaughters and, women that dress like girls and so on and so forth. It can't not affect the imagination, the fantasy. The idea is that, you can be masturbating to these things in a heightened state, and then turn your computer off, and all of that just goes on the shelf. You don't think about it again. And I don't think that happens. I think there really is always a relationship between media, what we're watching, what we're finding pleasurable. These things are out of our control. because it's important. The media want us continuously to be moving on, to be advertising wants to incite us further and further into wanting its products. So for some reason we think that with pornography this doesn't happen. It's a real delusion that we're suffering under, that pornography is about our own imaginations. It's actually completely the reverse. It's not about freedom. It's actually the pornography industry has a real hold on our imaginations. If we want to be free, we really need to make a critical analysis of this. Mm-hmm. And I think that young women probably are waiting, probably hoping for an analysis of this, because I think that women are also uncomfortable with it. It's not cool to be uncomfortable with it.
I think you're right. I mean, I think, because I remember when I was, when I was younger, I felt like I should like porn, and I felt pressure to be cool with porn, and I never felt cool or comfortable with porn, and it always upset me to see those images. But when we aren't offered that critique, we don't know how to critique it, and we don't know why we feel uncomfortable, so we just continue to think there's something wrong with us and to try to pressure ourselves into enjoying it and feeling turned on by it or feeling cool with it, because we aren't offered any other options.
And what we're being invited to do or incited to do as women is to actually get sexual pleasure from the degradation of other women. Mm. So, our sensitivities towards another woman would be, I imagine, to think, gosh, she's actually being choked. Her hair is being pulled, and she can hardly breathe, and she's being called horrid names for her pain, as if she deserves it. Now, in real life, we might feel a sensitivity to our sisters, to our friends, and so on, if this happened to them. But in pornography, we're told that this is okay, in some sense that she kind of deserves it, or there's something exciting about this. And how has that happened? How have we become so desensitized to that? It is quite incredible. One of the ways in which we're policed around this is that if we have any objection to it, then we're really uncool. And who wants that? Who wants to be seen as sexually repressed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially in our culture today, where everything, media is so sexualized and everything is so like hyper focused on sex, that we're told that as women that our liberation totally depends on our sex lives, and that the health of our relationships depends on our sex lives, and Meagan Tyler writes about this, about the way that in sex therapy, pornography will often be prescribed, in quotations, to couples and to women who are maybe feeling like they're having trouble with intimacy in their relationships, or they feel like they're not having as much sex or the kind of sex that they believe they should be having based on cultural norms or what their friends say, or what they're seeing on TV and pornography. It's that twist that tells us that pornography, it's not just normal, but it's healthy for individuals and for couples, And I can only imagine being in a room with a counselor, if I'm having problems in my relationship, I'm in a room with a counselor or, a sex therapist, and the therapist recommending that we watch pornography. It just feels so undermining, and I feel like that would almost feel like some kind of attack on me as a woman in my relationship, to say, what you need to do is you need to watch women being degraded, and you need to perform as these women are performing and behave as these women are behaving, and accommodate this kind of behavior from men in order for your relationship with your partner to be healthy. Mm. I wonder if you can talk a bit about that. I mean, how extensive is that practice of prescribing porn for things like so-called sexual dysfunction, for relationship problems, etc.?
I think Meagan Tyler described it very well, that there is a history to that too. So since psychotherapists have become more sensitive to feminist issues, they don't prescribe the kind of pornography that would have been prescribed in the 1970s, when women were really induced into or encouraged to be excited or to find acceptable violent pornography. So there has been some critical reflection on the parts of psychotherapists, I think, but it would be to watch what would be called woman-friendly porn, nothing too violent. But it's a bizarre idea that if we're having trouble in our relationship with our male partner, that what we have to do is watch pornography where, even if the woman isn't being completely and absolutely, violated, but she is nevertheless, what pornography does is treat women as objects to be penetrated and so on and so forth. It is about the man's pleasure. Mostly pornography is about men's pleasure and women faking pleasure in whatever the man does. And so it's an extra, as you say, it would be humiliating and degrading and unsatisfactory. It's not solving the problem. But does it exist? I think it does. It absolutely exists. And it exists in the popular imagination that pornography is going to help people who are in trouble with each other. I've just been with Gail, actually, in the States. I've just come back from the States. And I bought a trashy novel when I was there to read on the plane coming back. And there it was. It was a lovely, very sweet story, in fact. But the woman was having difficulties coming to terms with the fact that she's middle-aged and so on. And there she went off to spice up her relationship to a sort of couples therapy weekend. They watched pornography and they did nothing else when they came back for the next few years but have sex with each other constantly, and this solved the problems in there. This spiced up their relationship and they were back to being 20-year-olds again. It's everywhere, this idea that pornography is helpful to sexual relationships and to women. How can we can't escape it. But something else you said earlier I just wanted to come back on, is that you were talking about the pornification of the culture at large. I think it's very difficult for women because as much as we might feel uncomfortable in the pornography we see, and we don't have language to talk about it or to critique it, or we're frightened of doing that in case we're seen as prudes, there's a certain pleasure in the pornification of culture as well for women, in that it is a way to get power. If men find us attractive, if we become noticed, and if we've been brought up in a culture in which this is one direct way for women to get power, it's very difficult for women to critique that. It feels like to give it up would be to give up pleasure. So it is a very complicated issue that we have here.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we're set up in this way that we're rewarded as women for playing along and for participating in porn culture and for enjoying our own degradation and objectification. We're rewarded by men, and men are the ones in our culture who have power, not just political power and economic power, but also social power. So it's really tempting to go along with these narratives and these images and these ideas and to support this kind of media and discourse, because we are offered a certain, warped kind of power and privilege in society if we do that.
I think I say in the beginning of the book that I was interviewed by somebody. It was for radio in the UK, and when I went into the studio, the first thing that he said to me was, "You don't look like somebody who would be critical of pornography." And that encapsulated so much for me. Just the very first words that he said was that if you're critical of pornography, you really are sex negative. This idea that you're sex negative, if you have any critique of pornography at all, is so embedded in our culture now. Everybody's saying it. I think that sex negative term was coined by the liberal media theorists, actually, as an analytical term. and it's filtered right down now. It's filtered right down into the culture. So when I say the word police, I know it's a very strong word, but I think we really are, all of us, policed around this stuff. The pornography industry has been so successful. Media scholars have colluded or backed up the industry so that we're almost terrified to critique pornography. I can remember somebody said to me a few months ago, a person just not in academia, and she said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm writing a book about pornography." And I must have paused for a second, and she looked at me and she said, "It's okay, I'm not a prude, you can..." And so she assumed that I was writing a book which was pro-pornography and that it was okay to talk about that because she wasn't a prude. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it comes from the industry, and then it comes from men, and then it comes from women too, and there's just, yeah, it's real pervasive. I remember I was talking to a friend, and I told her that I wouldn't accept a man who I was in a relationship with watching pornography. You know, I don't want to be in a relationship with a man who watches pornography. So I set that boundary in my relationships with men. You know, no, you can't consume pornography, which I think is a perfectly reasonable boundary, right?
Yeah.
And she was totally appalled and kind of shamed me. I don't, that word is so overused that I try to avoid using it, but she made me feel like I was being cruel and mean and that I was controlling my partner's life somehow, or that I was, preventing him from, she equated it to masturbation. So she said, that's like saying that he can't masturbate. And I was like, I would never tell my boyfriend that he can't masturbate. Why would I care if he masturbates? But it's interesting that even women have been so indoctrinated to believe that porn is sexuality. Not just porn is a part of sexuality, but porn is sex, porn is sexuality, and any rejection of porn is a literal rejection of sex and sexuality. Yeah. I wanted to talk about this popularization of porn stars in pop culture. If you go on Twitter, there'll be porn stars that have like tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of followers, and we have publications like Cosmo and Glamour and Women's Health magazine offering sex tips from porn stars as if this is somehow beneficial to women. And we have sites like Vice, of course, who have consistently treated prostitution and pornography as something that's cool and edgy. And young women who are influenced by third wave feminism and haven't been exposed to second wave feminism, they know that they'll have more successful writing careers and media careers if they promote pornography and porn culture instead of criticizing it. So, porn stars are they've become, they're treated by liberal America as though they're these unbiased, trustworthy, and progressive experts on all things relating to sex and sexuality. And it seems so hard to reach young women through all of this propaganda that says porn is cool and empowering, and that they should aim to be like women in porn, that they should behave in bed the way that porn stars do and take their sex tips from people who profit from the porn industry. What do we do?
I don't know what we do about it. Actually, it's pointless telling young women that this glamorization of pornography is the public face of pornography. And actually, the people who perform in pornography are not living this. On the whole, very few people become actually successful through pornography. It spits young women out. It abuses women. You could tell many, many horror stories about what the pornography industry actually does to women. And in a sense, it's a kind of pointless exercise because the pornography industry has won in that way. It has glamorized pornography, and what it's done is very successfully, like all industries are powerful, not by forcing people to consume their products, but by making people voluntarily consume their products. So that's what's happened. I guess what needs to happen is that, we're talking about it, other people are talking about it. Eventually, I have a hope that there will become a tipping point where people will be able to hear criticisms of pornography. Like anything, and this is going to sound extreme again, social structures which were really oppressive, like the slave trade, where very nice people owned slaves. It was kind of thought of as quite reasonable to own slaves, and in fact that slaves didn't mind being slaves. And it took years and years and years to overturn that. We find that a horrific thought now, and I just hope that at some future point we will look back at this period in time and think, how could we have thought that there was anything sexually liberating or glamorous about what actually happens to women in pornography? How could we have thought that? How could we have understood that as women's emancipation? But until that point, lone voices will have to talk, critique, join each other in conversations until the culture eventually changed. I think a mistake that second wave feminists did make, and it was a mistake through being too hopeful, that women would rise up and revolt. That in critiquing pornography, that everybody would eventually see that this was oppressive to women, and that women would join up with each other and fight against it and overthrow patriarchy. I'm still hoping for the overthrow of patriarchy. I just think that history demonstrates that women have been so co-opted into it that the revolution hasn't happened, and it probably won't happen in the way that second wave feminists hoped that it would. But, feminism is on the rise again, which is great. And I think that there is possibly that women are open to having criticisms of pornography in the way that they probably haven't in the past 20 years. So let's just hope.
Thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Meagan. It's been great.
You just heard an interview with Heather Brunskell-Evans, a social theorist, philosopher, and senior research fellow at King's College in London. She is a national spokesperson for the Women's Equality Party policy on ending sexual violence and co-founder of Resist Porn Culture, a UK organization set up to challenge the pornography industry and the pornification of culture. As a trustee of Philia, a feminist charity that aims to bring about change for girls and women, Heather is helping to organize this year's Feminism in London conference, which is taking place October 14th and 15th. For more information on the conference, visit philia.org.uk. The Sexualized Body and the Medical Authority of Pornography is now available to buy online. That is all the time we have for today. I'm Meagan Murphy. Thanks for tuning in to Feminist Current. You can find us online at feministcurrent.com, tweet at us at feministcurrent, or send us an email at info@feministcurrent.com. We are hosted by Libsyn, and you can subscribe to the Feminist Current podcast anywhere you like to listen. iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, TuneIn, and beyond. You can even give us 5 stars and a review on iTunes. Show the world radical feminism is worth listening to. Feminist Current is a syndicated show produced and edited by myself, Meagan Murphy, out of Vancouver, BC. If your station would like to air Feminist Current, you can find episodes at audioport.org. And finally, if you enjoyed this podcast, consider making a donation to support our work. Just visit feministcurrent.com and click the donate button.